Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host, Jacob LaQuire. And today, what we're going to be discussing is kind of the quarterback market as it stands, the quarterbacks that have been made available, that are on the move, and draft prospects that are going to kind of add a different layer to some of these teams and how they approach the position. And I think the best analogy is because we have some of these teams that are riding on these quarterback outcomes. So many general managers, head coaches rest their laurels on who they ride with at the quarterback position, whether it's a savvy veteran acquired through trade or free agency, or a quarterback that's drafted. And so much of these legacies are impacted by that. And so when you see a team like the Giants, with nobody really at quarterback right now, and Brian Daboll and Joe Shine on the hot seat, do they get desperate? Do they overpay? And I think the best analogy for that is we're coming up on allergy season. Spring's right around the corner. And sometimes to get instant relief, you're willing to pay exponentially more for, say, a Mucinex or a Sudafed, something to provide a little bit of relief in the nasal system. And so you're willing to pay sometimes 3-4 times more than you would at a general store at a gas station because you're looking for that immediate relief. And so in that case, I think there are a lot of teams that are going to operate with overpaying for a quarterback and have potentially already overpaid for a quarterback. And I think the best way to kick this off in terms of being legacy defining and having a lot of cost attached to it, the Seattle Seahawks sent Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders on Friday for a third-round pick. How do you see this trade for both sides, Jacob? Like from the Raiders' perspective and then also from the Seahawks.
Well, for the Raiders, I think you gotta love it, right? Because they're a team that over the past couple years has really been looking for that QB, haven't really found it, and now finally they have at minimum a stopgap guy and a guy that I think has his ceiling is probably around the bottom of the top 10. You can run a functional offense for him, so you gotta love it. The Seahawks, I don't know, because free agency has started, right? You talked about this trade being last Friday. Free agency started yesterday on Monday because we're recording on Tuesday the 11th, and the Seahawks replaced Geno Smith with somebody that they allegedly offered the same deal to Geno, but Geno said, no, I think I want more. Send me to my old coach with the Raiders because Pete Carroll's there now. But that was really the first domino, I think, to fall. And the first thing we saw on Monday, the first quarterback free agent we saw signed was his replacement. And that was Sam Darnold, kind of the big name in the QB free agent market this year. And I think his deal is frankly outrageous. But that's kind of where the quarterback market is nowadays. And I just don't know. The whole Seahawks offseason to this point has kind of left me perplexed, especially on offense. Get rid of their quarterback. At least with Geno, you had a starter. If his floor was a low-tier starter, he's a starter. You don't have to replace him. They traded DK Metcalf to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought they got a very good return for that. And then they're cutting Tyler Lockett as well. All of this with no good O-line, and they haven't added anybody, to my knowledge, on offense yet in free agency. So that's kind of my initial take, right? I like it for the Raiders. I don't like it for the Seahawks. How are you kind of viewing the Seahawks as free agency opens for them? Because they haven't really been like super busy.
So what's interesting when we talk about Geno Smith, depending on the metrics you're looking at, whether they're advanced or just basic passing metrics, Geno Smith is anywhere from borderline top 10 to kind of like average. Mm-hmm. And obviously, like you mentioned, like I even said prior, there's a baseline or a floor that Geno Smith gives you. But he's 35 years old. And how many quarterback careers outside of Tom Brady or some of these other Hall of Fame guys make it past there and are able to play at a productively high level? And I think that list is very short. And so the Seahawks got what they could for that quarterback. Obviously, had offered him a deal that they were willing to pay him, wanting to continue with him, but didn't want to necessarily, I guess, strap themselves too much from a cap standpoint. So this was the money they allotted. They ended up signing Sam Darnold. And I understand the interior of their offensive line is a wreck, especially with Laken Tomlinson leaving in free agency. He wasn't necessarily a great starter to begin with, but I think when you have Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas as your two tackles, if they're able to find maybe a couple guys in free agency that are still available and draft a few more, I think they can shore up that a lot quicker than we're maybe necessarily giving them credit for.
Yeah, hopefully they're able to do that. I'm a bit more skeptical because I think, now they have to get another guy. Laken Tomlinson was serviceable, but he goes to help CJ Stroud, who is surprisingly just losing all of his O-line players as well. I think my bigger hang up here is with Sam Darnold, right? Obviously, career year. He cashed in on this year with what he did in Minnesota, but that was a very good situation for him. The Vikings O-line, I thought, was quite good. They've gotten even better throughout the early stages of free agency. He was throwing to the best, if not the second best wide receiver in the NFL. His number 2 receiver was Jordan Addison, who was the best or second best of the rookies a year ago. He had another solid year this year. When TJ Hawkinson came back, he performed quite well. Their running game didn't really fall off. I thought Aaron Jones was a serviceable back there. I believe they re-signed him. The Vikings did a couple days ago before free agency started. But he was in a very favorable system, is what I would say. Sam Darnold performed in with Kevin O'Connell. Obviously, I'm going to bring it up every time. Every time we talk about it, you called him a pumpkin when things got tough for him, and that's kind of how he played. And now things are going to be tough for him. I know Clint Kubiak dealt with, who's the new offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, by the way. I know he dealt with a poor O-line in New Orleans this past season, but I think Derek Carr, for all of his faults, he minimizes mistakes. And Sam Darnold isn't a player that I think of when I think of minimizing mistakes. And if you put him in a disadvantageous situation where I love JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba, he had a great year. Their wide receiver 2 right now is Jake Bobo. They don't have a wide receiver 2 or 3. I like AJ Barner, the young tight end, but he's more of a projection guy. I don't like their offensive line. Their running backs are always hurt. If you put Sam Darnold in that kind of situation where he's a guy that can't limit mistakes, I just don't really know at that point. And then getting at the numbers of his deal, it's a 3-year deal, right? Just over $100 million, 55 guaranteed, and 37.5 is guaranteed in year 1. Hopefully, if the way they're viewing it is like it's a 2-year deal and hopefully they get their QB of the future, if that's what they're doing, you know what? Go for it if they're restarting that way. But I think they have a lot more to worry about than just QB. And I think that going from at least serviceable offense in the first year of Mike McDonald's tenure, and it was just him. John Schneider's been there forever. But the first year of his tenure, then going to Darnold, who I think is less than serviceable, to potentially a rookie, doesn't inspire me with confidence that he's going to be the long-term head coach moving forward. I think that's kind of my main takeaway with the Sam Darnold and Seattle situation as free agency kicks off.
My question to you, and I want to ask this in terms of putting quarterbacks in a tier. Will you put Sam Darnold, at least when he doesn't turn into a pumpkin, capable of producing at a Brock Purdy type level? Like he's in that kind of tier where he can operate an offensive system that could be quarterback friendly. He just needs to be given all the answers.
Probably. I mean, and here's the thing, right? If he really were better than Purdy, would he have supplanted Purdy the year he was in San Francisco? Like, that's kind of the thing. And I don't know. I think if things go well, he can certainly operate at an operative level, I guess.
Yeah. And I personally do think Purdy is a little bit better than Sam Darnold. I'm more just saying in terms of we're talking about these players in a tier and going, okay, if
throw them in that
environment that they can produce at a similar level. And so with Sam Darnold, I think when you throw him in a Clint Kubiak offense, and they're going to be running a lot of inside and outside zone, and you have 2 very dynamic running backs there in Seattle, I think you can lean on the run game and those two players being extremely explosive in Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. You have a young superstar wide receiver in Jackson Smith and Jigba. And at pick 18, maybe you take a guy like Luther Burton out of Missouri. And all of a sudden, now you have two very explosive wide receivers to work with. And that's exactly what Clint Kubiak had to work with in New Orleans with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. And so you just wonder if that's kind of the thought process right now of reinventing this offense and giving Sam Darnold easy reads and just going, hey, make this throw right here. The guy's going to be open, and allowing him to just like let Darnold be Darnold. And that's a guy with a very talented arm that sometimes makes very bad decisions. So I think that's what Kubiak brings to the Seattle offense. I think they can minimize the issues with the offensive line, but they do need to address them with free agency signings and draft picks. But I think moving on, we can talk about some of the other guys that were signed. Justin Fields, he was signed by the New York Jets. Kenny Pickett traded to the Cleveland Browns. And then today, Daniel Jones signed with the Indianapolis Colts. Out of those three signings, what stuck out to you the most?
What stuck out? Probably Daniel Jones probably stuck out the most. I think a lot of people thought he would return to Minnesota, but apparently he's going to be battling for QB1 with Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis, which is quite the fall from grace, being a top 3 pick. Only 2 drafts ago for top 4 pick. Only 2 drafts ago for Anthony Richardson to now competing with Daniel Jones, but he got a sizable deal, $13.15 million guaranteed this season. I think he might end up the starter there. We'll have to see. Justin Fields probably got the most impressive deal out of all the other QB signings so far. He's going to the Jets. He's reuniting with Garrett Wilson. He's going to get 40 over 2 with 30 guaranteed. I like this for the Jets. It's like a stopgap option for them in the interim while they search for their young QB of the future. If they're able to turn it around with Justin Fields, I think he's still young enough that he can be a guy down the line that gets these kind of Darnold contracts moving forward. And then the Kenny Pickett one, I just put it on the notes because at the time only Darnold and Darnold and Justin Fields had signed. And I think it's always notable when a quarterback goes to Cleveland, right? Because anytime a QB goes to Cleveland, they should be competing for that starting role with Deshaun Watson. I don't think it could be much worse. So maybe Kenny Pickett gets a chance to be a starter again. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know what that means for Jerry Jeudy's fantasy stock. Like it was super high with Jameis Winston, but I feel like it's going to be fairly capped with a guy like Kenny Pickett or Deshaun Watson at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. So it'll be very interesting to see if they do anything at the number 2 overall pick. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but I want to touch on Daniel Jones. And for those of you who are watching the YouTube stream and the video, the interesting thing to note with design runners last year is that out of the top 5 quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones both were in the top 5. Anthony Richardson at 4 and Daniel Jones at 5 for design runs. And when you're looking at efficiency being expected points added. So I think what's very interesting was what Shane Steichen and John Irsay and Chris Ballard are kind of all doing collaboratively is going, okay, we're going to design an offense that works for both of these quarterbacks that can be extremely mobile and move kind of with the football and create 11-on-11 scenarios. And we have very dynamic pass catchers, a good offensive line in front of these guys, and we can make this a competitive outlook and put ourselves in a position where we're not just winning 8 or 9 games, we're winning 10 or 11, and we're making the postseason, making a push for the AFC South. So I think this was a really smart move by the Colts in adding just depth at a position that is becoming somewhat tumultuous and where you're seeing a lot of coaches on the hot seat. This was a very smart, savvy move by a team that is trying the trend in the right direction.
I think it's notable looking at this graphic that both these guys are quite high in designed run EPA, but below average in scramble EPA. So these guys we think of as being mobile QB as well. Maybe it's when the plays are drawn up for them, right? When they have the ball in their hand trying to make decisions, not necessarily the best movers. But yeah, I think I mean, obviously, Darnold and Fields are going to be starters. We expect them to, unless something bizarre happens. Geno Smith as well is going to be the starter. Kenny Pickett, who knows? And I think Daniel Jones does have a good chance. I saw somebody say that it's like if Anthony Richardson, we're bringing you Daniel Jones. If you don't beat him in camp, you don't deserve to start. And like that's the fairest ultimatum you can give. I kind of understand that. Some of the free agent QBs that are still out there testing the waters, if you will. Jameis Winston, he was the Browns starter you were talking about. Don't know where he's going to go. Russell Wilson still unsigned as well, and Aaron Rodgers, I think, is the biggest name, maybe not the biggest talent anymore, given that I think the spots for him are quite limited. Don't think he can go to the Rams with Devontae Adams now, so we'll have to see. But what are some of the best fits for these three remaining guys, in your opinion?
So best fits for a lot of these guys are going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers because you have DK Metcalf and George Pickens there.
Mm-hmm.
You have a fairly, I would say, at least average offensive line. I think they have the ability to take a step this year. But when you see all those pieces kind of coming together, I think that's very conducive for a quarterback that is on the open market. The quarterback I would want to see in Pittsburgh is Jameis Winston. I think he can let it rip. I think he's honestly where we talk about Sam Darnold getting this Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield kind of contract. I think if Jameis Winston plays his cards right in a scenario like this and does really, really well, and I think has the ability to excel in a Arthur Smith type offense, then all of a sudden we're looking at a scenario where Jameis Winston is now a guiding force for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, does that mean that they win playoff games? Are they able to go on a little bit of a run? Who knows? But I think it makes their offense exciting and fun to watch, even if there are some boneheaded mistakes and turnovers that cost them a game or two.
Yeah, I like Jameis a lot for the New York Giants, for that matter. I think they need some kind of performative player, like a showstopper. I think with the Titans not trading the first round pick as of now, because we're into free agency, I think that kind of signals that they're going to stay at one and maybe pick Cam Ward, we assume. If it's not traded on draft week, I don't think it'll get traded at all, which means the Giants are kind of left in limbo here. I like Jameis Winston there. As far as the the Steelers, I think retaining Russ might be an interesting thing that they look at. DK Metcalf, George Pickens, both big downfield receivers. And Russ, he showed he can still throw the moon ball. So if they want to keep that as a part of the offense, I think that would be interesting. I have no idea where Rodgers is going to go. I think I actually don't think he fits anywhere, to be quite honest, because he's going to want to run his style of offense. I don't know if the Giants would want to pair him with a rookie if that ends up if they're able to get a rookie in this draft. I don't know if the Steelers I think they're going to want a bit more out of the QB, and I think Jameis can provide more than Rodgers can at this point. So for me, where he's going to go is the most intriguing option for me. I know it's not written up here.
Who's going to be the backup for the Vikings? We've talked about this.
Well,
we have off camera.
If Rodgers goes to the Vikings and completes the Brett Favre arc, that could certainly be interesting. But I saw something today, and it made me think that you see the 49ers shedding all these players, presumably getting ready to sign Brock Purdy. What if they don't want to sign Brock Purdy? I think that could be a Rodgers spot if they're really not willing to go down the Brock Purdy road.
Do you understand how salty Tom Brady would be with that kind of move?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like I was available as a free agent and you said no. We're okay with Jimmy G. We have Jimmy G.
It's like the Isaiah Thomas. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't. But again, this is going back to year one for Rodgers. That's where he was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the first overall pick for the Niners. They end up taking Alex Smith. Yada, yada, yada. He ends up on the Packers. He grew up a 49ers fan, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe that is the 1 year, I guess, walking out into the sunset for him is going to the 49ers. But to me, he's the most intriguing of the remaining QBs. Where is he going to go? But I really think both the Giants and Steelers should consider guys like Russ, guys like Jameis over Rodgers.
So you kind of already alluded to it with the Titans. The Giants are also in a position. I think this is a good segue of talking about just free agents, quarterbacks, and guys that are available from that standpoint, and prospects that are coming out of college. And this obviously isn't last year's quarterback class. It's not next year's quarterback class. This is probably very comparable to 2022. And my question is with Cam Ward, do you feel comfortable taking him if you're the Titans at 1, heck, if you're the Browns at 2, or the Giants at 3? Because I think all 3 of those teams have a question at quarterback. Do you think some are content with what's available in free agency, or do you think they're going to take a guy there?
Well, if the 3 teams you mentioned, the Titans, Browns, and Giants, 1, 2, 3 in the draft, I think any of them would like to have Cam Ward. I think this is more akin to maybe – I don't think Cam Ward is as good a prospect as Kyler was, but I think it's more akin to that draft. That was Kyler, Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins, I believe, were the first-round QBs in that one. I think this is a bit more similar to that. I think Ward stands alone above the rest. And I think that any of those teams would like to have him, right? This is a guy that I think out of everybody in this class has the potential to be a franchise guy, certainly the highest potential there. In terms of like strengths of him, one of the things I look at is being a creator. And over the past couple of years, right, you see Caleb Williams going number 1 overall. He was a great creator in college. Bryce Young going number 1 overall. He was an excellent creator in college. Even CJ Stroud created in that playoff game, his last game of his college career. We saw Drake May do it a good bit. We saw Jaden Daniels certainly do it, right? He was the Heisman winner. And then you see what he did in the league this season. That's a big thing for me evaluating QBs nowadays, and nobody in this class did it better than Cam Ward. If you look at all of his highlight plays, right, it's going to be him not standing behind the line, but being back in the pocket, escaping pressure, and then finding the right play downfield, or finding a little pitch to his running back, Damian Martinez, or finding a check down to his tight ends. He knows how to find things, and that's a big thing for me. Like, if you're looking at all the draftable QBs in this class, and you've brought up a good graphic here, I think he does the best creation out of everybody, except for maybe Milroe, but he's more of a running creative person, not a run to pass guy like Cam Ward. And when we talk about it like that, it makes me think of Mahomes, right? Mahomes scrambles to find passes. He doesn't necessarily scramble to get upfield and get 6 yards. I think that's probably Cam Ward's biggest strength at the moment.
Absolutely. I think when the few games I watched of his leading up to this is that he has probably the most live arm out of this draft class. I think his ability to make certain throws is unlike any other prospect that is available in this year's draft. And so when you see that ability to create, I think you get excited. But the thing that goes along with that I think causes some hesitation is he can be a little bit reckless, which leads to turnovers, particularly in the red zone. And I think when games get a little bit longer and he has to be put in a situation where he has to rally and throw a lot throughout the game, there appears to be almost like arm fatigue, and he relies a little bit more on scrambling, which we saw in a graphic a little bit earlier. Some of the top quarterbacks are really good scramblers. So I think that is his ability of understanding that there are limitations to his game, and he's able to offset that. And I think his growth from being in a run-heavy offense in high school where there was very little passing to his development now just speaks volumes of how he can develop potentially into a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. So I agree with you there that he's the top guy in this class. Who is your number 2 guy? For me, I think Jackson Dart, in terms of age, in terms of just his ability as a passer and a scrambler, are traits that kind of translate to the next level. Is he your guy at number 2, or are you more fond of the guy out of Colorado?
Yeah, so for me, Cam Ward stands alone. I think I've said that. And then the next group to me is kind of a cluster between a guy like Jackson Dart, I think Jalen Milroe probably is the highest ceiling out of everyone not named Cam Ward. But I think right now I'm settling on Shedeur Sanders as my number 2 quarterback. For me, his superpower, because when you're drafting QBs, you want to find their superpower, their strength. What are they best at that can translate to the next level? With Ward, it's his creativity and his fearlessness in attempting layered throws, which are throws between the linebacker and the safety. Tougher throws is kind of how I put it. With Shedeur Sanders, to me, it's his accuracy. I think he's incredibly accurate. He either led or was close to leading college football in completion percentage this year. Go back to last year, it was Bo Nix. He was taken 12th overall. He knows where to find open receivers. I think he has very good field vision, which is something limited to a lot of college QBs. They kind of tunnel vision on their number one guy, or they don't really go through their progressions. That's one of the issues I have with Jackson Dart. But Shedeur Sanders does a really good job of going through his progressions, finding what's open. I think he has a quick release. He doesn't necessarily have the strongest arm, but I think it's capable, because you're not often going to be throwing 40 and 50-yard lasers in the NFL. Like, what makes Josh Allen special isn't his monster arm. It's how he's able to create with his legs and throw the ball downfield. Mahomes isn't special just because of his arm, right? It's his ability to scramble behind the line and look for what's open. Lamar Jackson isn't just special because he has a strong arm, and he doesn't even have the strongest arm, but he can create. That's my big hang up with Shedeur Sanders is I don't think he can create as a scrambler or outside of the pocket as well as a guy like Cam Ward can, or even guys like Milroe and Dart, who I have in the same tier. I think Sanders is quite limited athletically, like on the run, trying to get away from pressure. And that's why I don't have him as a clear number 2, like ahead of the rest of this group. But for me, I think I have him leading the pack just because I think he could probably operate an NFL passing system the best out of these guys.
For me, and it was kind of what you were alluding to, is for me, I don't see that superpower from Shedeur Sanders. I understand some people who have watched the film believe he is very accurate. Some of the completion percentage numbers reflect that. But I think when you turn on the tape, he doesn't really pass the ball that far beyond 10 plus yards down the field. And when you're looking at some of those 20 to 30 plus yard throws downfield, he's underthrowing them. And in order to get it there, he has to put his whole body into it. And when you talked about guys like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, why, yes, part of what makes them special is their ability to scramble and create outside of the pocket, which Shedeur Sanders doesn't necessarily have. It's their ability to just flick their wrists and the ball to travel 20, 30 yards downfield. Like, if Shedeur Sanders struggles with doing that with a clean pocket, with stepping into it, he's not going to be able to make those kind of throws outside of structure. And there were some throws, I will say, to his credit, where he was able to roll out, where he was able to flip his hips and throw an accurate pass on a third down in a key situation to keep the chains moving. But I just didn't see enough of it to warrant that. I think some of the first round or even maybe second round discourse has gotten him. And I think that's simply because of the name on his jersey and not what he's put on the field.
And how I would respond to that is number 1 in the NFL. I don't think you could call Joe Burrow a strong-armed guy. I think he actually
some
has
of the throws he
probably
made that Chase and Higgins last year were actually traveling extremely far downfield.
But I would say he has a bottom 5 NFL arm as a starter.
Absolutely.
So for me, arm strength is kind of a threshold. I think Shedeur Sanders is fine in that regard. Number 2, Pat Shurmur, the former head coach. He was their offensive coordinator this year. Their scheme emphasized a lot of yak. They had guys like LeJontay Wester, Jimmy Horton Jr., Will Shepard, who was a transfer, Travis Hunter. All of these guys are phenomenal speedsters after the catch. So not necessarily stressing downfield throws as much as, hey, let me get the ball into my super athlete Travis Hunter's hands and let him go to work. And then the third thing I would say in regards to his name brand and that value, I think that would be more of a point if when he went to these programs didn't like completely turn them around. Jackson State, they were one of the worst. I think it's the SWAC division that they're in. They won their division when they was there. Goes to Colorado, who was the worst Power 5 program at the time. Now they're Power 4, right, because the Pac-12 no longer exists, unfortunately. But in 2 years, they went from I think they were 2-10 when they got there. Year one, they win 5 games. This year, they're on the doorstep of the college football playoff. And I think a big part of that is the steadying hand and ability to operate that Shedeur brought to the team. And number 4 now, with all this in mind, he's a winner. And that's something that matters to me as somebody evaluating QBs. Go back to last year and you want to see why people thought so highly of J.J. McCarthy when in comparison to guys like Michael Penix Jr., he might not have a stronger arm, even though I think McCarthy does. He might not be as good of a system QB as Bo Nix was. He's a winner at Michigan, and I think that's a big part in how people in the NFL evaluate QBs transitioning to the next level. And obviously Mahomes is an outlier because they didn't really win at Texas Tech, but he was throwing like 700 yards a game. So the offensive production was there. I think a lot of the times when you're kind of projecting, if you're a general manager per se, you're trying to project if a guy can come in and take your team to the next level. Well, it helps if they did that in college, and Sanders has done that twice.
So elevating a program and being successful in the NFL, I think, are two completely different things.
I agree.
think what's also not being discussed here is arguably the best player in this year's draft class was also on that team and impacted not only the production we saw, but also the other looks that he was able to get on his second and third read in that progressive NFL style offense in Colorado. For me, I didn't see the production that warranted it. I thought he had poor pocket presence, like we talked about already. We agree that he isn't a great creator. I think Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, they offer a little bit more of that in terms of upside. You see the athleticism there. You see the arm strength, the arm talent. It's not honed in enough. And I think for those two players, if they were to land in favorable situations where they can sit behind someone for a couple of years and develop, that would be in their best interest. But when we're talking about ranking these quarterback prospects, for me, like you've said, Cam Ward is the definitive number 1. But I think when you get to quarterbacks 2 and 3, for me, it is Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe because of that upside that they're going to offer. And for me, knowing how this quarterback class shapes up to other classes, that the goal isn't to find a day one starter, it's to find a franchise cornerstone moving forward and taking a calculated risk on that investment. For me, Shedeur Sanders is below a guy like Tyler Shuck out of Louisville. For me, I know you and I disagree, but for me, I see a lot more arm talent. For me, that translates a lot more than potentially some of these accuracy things that we're seeing in a short range for Shedeur Sanders.
And that's fair. Like I said, when it comes to my 2, 3, and 4, Sanders, Dart, Milroe, they're all in a cluster for me. And I don't think to your point, Shedeur Sanders has done enough to separate himself from that group. Same thing with Jackson Dart. Same thing with Milroe. With Jackson Dart on both of our minds, because he's your number 2. He's my next guy at number 3. One of the things I like about him is that, like you're saying, he has a capable arm. He's able to fling it downfield, and that was a big part of Ole Miss's offense this past year. When you talk about their receivers, they have guys like Trey Harris, who I think is going to go on day 2. They had Juice Wells, the South Carolina transfer, another downfield target guy. Jordan Watkins, he's probably the lesser known of their big 3 receivers. He had a 5-touchdown game against Arkansas, and most of it was deep ball and plus yak. That was really the Ole Miss system, and Jackson Dart was able to operate that at quite a high level. I think, too, when we talk about creation, he's able to get scramble yards, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a good pocket mover or anything like that. I also don't think I would use him as a scrambler in the NFL because very similar to Shedeur Sanders, once he gets hit, he just goes down. Like, he's not going to truck people. Even in the pocket, this was one of the biggest concerning things for me with Jackson Dart is when he's in the pocket, he just doesn't escape, and when he gets hit, he just goes down. I don't think he has great contact balance, but I think he has the field vision. He's not afraid to attempt the difficult passes, and he has a capable arm. And I think when you have those 3 things with a slight potential to create, you always have to have a look in that next group. I have all 3 of these guys on day 2, preferably round 2. And then the next guy, Jalen Milroe, he was like a tale of 2 quarterbacks this year. If you look at the first 4 games plus the LSU game, he was like the best quarterback in the past couple years, right? Especially the LSU and Georgia games. He was frying with both his arm and his legs. But then you look at some of the other games. The Vanderbilt game was a very tough watch as an Alabama fan. The Oklahoma game was quite bad. The Tennessee game, the South Carolina game, which Alabama won, but I think it was much closer than it should have been. The very few losses that Alabama's had over the past couple years, you can really attribute a good portion of the responsibility on those losses to Jalen Milroe. And that's like the biggest concern for me. He's very streaky. I think once Saban retired, he dropped off as a passer, even though the new head coach, Kalen DeBoer, and the system that they brought in should be more conducive to a passer. We just saw one of their passers in last year's draft go number 8 overall to the Atlanta Falcons. I think Jalen Milroe's pocket presence is hit or miss. He has the ability to escape from literally any rusher, anybody who comes to get him. Jalen Milroe is more athletic than them. It wouldn't surprise me that if he had tested everything at the combine, he would be the next 10.0 RAS score kind of guy. Like, that's the kind of athlete he is, but sometimes he just wouldn't do that. He would just go backwards and take unnecessary sacks. So it's the streakiness that you get with him, but when he's on, it's special to watch. Like, I was rewatching the Georgia-Alabama game today, looking at Jalen Walker, their star, like kind of hybrid guy, and Jalen Milroe was just frying him. Every time Walker would blitz, he would instantly find the hole that Walker left, and that would be the hot read. Anytime somebody came after Milroe in the pocket, he would just run away for him for a 20-yard gain up the field. And that's the upside that you get with Milroe. It's just kind of reining in the poor tendencies. And I think you would want him to be a guy that maybe sits for a year and learns going through progressions and things like that. Hopefully getting the mental speed up in the game for him, because the potential is there, but the bust potential is definitely there as well.
And that's where he's going to be a day 2 quarterback. And I think if a team with a really, really good offensive line wants to take a flyer on him and let him sit behind their quarterback, I understand he's a different passer coming out of college than a guy like Jalen Hurts. But even if the Eagles took a flyer on him in the 2nd or 3rd round with a pick, and you sit him behind, if Jalen Hurts gets hurt, you at least have that upside where, okay, you don't miss a beat on your 4th and 1s. And you have some of that upside that you were talking about, where he can read kind of, okay, the blitzer's coming, I'm throwing to that area in the field. And we've seen defenses layer looks to where they know that you're going to go there and they're able to counter. But for me, I think Jalen Milroe can put himself in a position where if he's able to sit a little bit, that he has the potential to maybe be something special, or at least offer an offense a baseline in terms of production, whether it's kind of creating a very run-heavy offense for him to operate, or allowing his big arm to kind of play out in play action looks and some of these deep passing patterns.
Yeah, I like the Rams for him. And I know that he and Matthew Stafford probably couldn't be more different at this point. I think Stafford's a bit of a statue at this point in his career. But the way Sean McVay's been able to adapt his offenses throughout his time in LA, I think if you can land Milroe in the 2nd round, we have their 2nd round pick. If they end up with a pick and they're able to land Milroe maybe in the 3rd round, or they trade up into round 2, I don't know. But if he's able to sit behind Stafford, who I think is one of the better processors in this league for a year, and then come out fresh and offer a new run design to the Rams offense, I think that would be very, very fun to see. But for me, and I think for you too, that kind of wraps up the 1st and 2nd clusters, so to speak, of QBs. I know the first cluster is really just one guy and Cam Ward. After that, it's day 3 is the rest of the stuff for me. And you mentioned Tyler Shuck. I have him in there with a guy like Riley Leonard, with a guy like Will Howard. We can talk about Shuck because you have him at a higher regard than some of the other QBs there. I'm just scrolling to my notes here. For me, when you look at him versus Shedeur Sanders, because that's 4 and 5 for you, if I am not mistaken, I think when you compare them side by side, Tyler Shuck, much stronger arm, right? He attempts the deep third of the field at a much higher rate, and he actually throws outside the numbers at quite a high rate as well, which I think is comparable to the NFL. I think he has good ball pressure when he's unpressured, and again, he's not afraid to attempt these harder throws. He has a quick release as well, but he has a lot of the same weaknesses that Shedeur Sanders has. he can't get out of the pocket. Like if he gets out of the pocket, you're looking at a 2-yard gain. He's not going to be a super scramble yard gainer. I think his field where Shador Sanders thrives, and I think Shuck struggles, is in field vision. I think Shuck is very tunnel visioned and throws to, predetermined routes and spots. I think it's quite apparent, especially down the middle of the field when he attempts deep middle passes. He's just thrown into triple coverage because he pinpoints that spot. He's like, all right, I'm just going to give my guy a chance. I think you have to take into account the system that he played in with Jeff Brom, his head coach. It's kind of a QB-friendly system. It emphasizes a lot of crossing over the middle to gain easy one-on-ones for the receiver and play a pitch and catch in the end of the short to the intermediate part of the field, so like 5 to 15 yards. Really emphasizes that, and outside the throw numbers, which is where both of the top two Louisville receivers, Colin Lacey and Ja'Cory Brooks, formerly of Alabama, I think they both really excel there. When you're taking a chance on a QB, because at the end of the day, outside or even Cam Ward, but outside of Cam Ward, you're kind of taking chances on these guys to be your franchise QB. With Tyler Shuck, I see the arm. I see the experience in multiple systems. We have to remember this guy is 25 years old. He's going to be 26, I think, 3 weeks into his rookie season. So he has the experience, he has the arm, and he knows how to excel in quick systems. I think that's a place like Miami where he could make his mark like as Tua's backup, because Tua has a tendency to get hurt. I think that would be a good spot for him. But I don't think he has the potential to create, the potential to go through an offense that stresses multiple multiple progressions that you have to work through. I don't think Tyler Shuck is there. But for a guy that can work in a quick rhythm offense, I think Shuck is an excellent choice as anywhere from QB 5 to 7 or 8. I think he would excel there in that cluster of QBs.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously discrepancy between how we see things. You discussed Shuck's ability to kind of press the football downfield, and I think that's a trait that we see some of the better quarterbacks be able to do in the NFL. You have to keep defenses honest with your arm. I think some of the issues with pressure and sack evasion and ability to scramble obviously aren't there. Huge injury history, so things to knock on him. Obviously, every different team is going to have these quarterbacks ranked slightly different based on what they value, what they see, and what they think these quarterbacks can develop into. But I think the main crux of it is outside of Cam Ward, a lot of these guys probably shouldn't be taken in the first round, but there may be a guy or two that kind of gets taken a little bit higher, and it will be interesting to see who those guys are. Do you think Cam Ward's a lock to be taken in the first 3 picks, or do you think he'll fall out of the top 3 and actually slide to another quarterback, a needy team in the top 10?
I would lock him into number 1 at this point. At the worst, I think he's going to go number 2. If the Titans stay there and convince themselves that they need Abdul Carter to be their defensive cornerstone of the future, then he's not making it past the Cleveland Browns, who even if they trade for another backup QB, they need a real QB going forward. And I think Cam Ward offers the highest upside or chance that he'll turn into that. But I really think at this point that the Titans, with the last 2 years, their first round picks have been offensive linemen. They just signed Dan Moore Jr. from the Pittsburgh Steelers, gave him a pretty hefty deal to be their starting left tackle. I think it was just over $80 million over 4 years. They're building this O-line for something, and I think Brian Callahan saw enough out of Will Levis Levis's year 2, but Callahan's year 1, that they know that they need to swing again for the QB, because until you have the QB, you got to keep swinging. Look at what the Panthers did from 2020 till we got Bryce Young. We just kept swinging. But yeah, I know on this graph here you have Will Howard as well. I think he and Riley Leonard are quite similar. Guys that can operate systems and run the ball as well, create just a little bit. I have Riley as my QB5, I believe, just because I was quite impressed with his playoff run. I think he was largely the engine of that Notre Dame offense, who outside of Jeremiah Love, who was a true freshman running back, not a lot of potent offensive weapons there. So I'm quite high on Riley Leonard compared to consensus, I think. But to your point about like QB clusters, nobody's going to have the same order. I saw multiple people after the combine had Will Howard as their QB3. There is no definitive order this year other than, and I'm sure that there are teams that don't have Cam Ward at 1, Cam Ward at 1. And to the final point that you brought up, that Cam Ward should probably be the only first rounder. Look at recent QB drafts or drafts in general. How many went last year in the first round? It was 6, right? We didn't think 6 people would go in the first round. I went back and looked at my table, my big board last year, and I had 3 QBs in my top 32. It was obviously Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels. In that order were my 1, 2, and 3. And then they go 1, 2, and 3. And then Michael Penix goes 8th. And then I'm missing, JJ McCarthy goes 10. The Vikings trade up to 10 to get him, and then Bo Nix at 12. So one of the things I wrote in my notes, because I always do like a positives, negatives, and then I write like a little conclusion paragraph for each prospect. And to the point about Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe, we talked about their strengths and weaknesses, right? Dart's more of a system guy. Milroe is just very streaky. The last sentence I wrote for Jackson Dart. However, if Bo Nix and Mac Jones can be top half of day 1 NFL draft picks, I have no problem with Dart being taken on day 1. And then for Milroe, I said, if teams are able to convict themselves on prospects like Will Levis, I know he didn't go day 1, he went pick 32. I'm counting that as day 1. As Anthony Richardson, I think you can take the chance on Milroe and take him in the first round. And then I wrote maybe his old college offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, who got the most out of him in 2023, can unlock him more in the league. Rees is now the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. So I don't think I would take Milroe at pick number 2. Maybe the Browns trade up to like 32, and that could be like if he were to go in the first round kind of spot. We saw Lamar Jackson go pick 32 after the Ravens traded back into the first round to get him. I'm not saying they're comparable prospects whatsoever, but I am saying in today's NFL, I think if you are convicted on your QB and you are willing to spend a high pick on him, you might as well do it in the first.
We'll see come April. I think both of us are in agreement, though, that there's only one quarterback with a first-round grade.
Yeah.
There's a clear cutoff. Will teams reach? Probably. Will it bite them in the butt? We will see. But I think right now, before we get out of here, we did want to touch on some of the free agent acquisitions by the Carolina Panthers. We are a Carolina Panthers podcast. That's been obvious. That's what we're here to talk about and be about. And I think it's a good idea to kind of go through the current signings. Thursday, after we talk about the running backs, I think we'll talk about kind of the other positions we need. But to start it off, we extend J.C. Horn. He gets a $100 million extension over 4 years that gets tacked on plus his 5th year. So it's really 5 years. I think it comes in to a little over $22 million a year. Obviously, $70 million of that new contract is guaranteed money. Huge deal. Will push the market up for guys like Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley coming up here soon. How do you feel about this signing? Do you like it? I think he's definitely proven he's worth that when he's been on the field. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you there. If he had played, let's say, 55 out of the 71 or however many available games, I think it's 78 because 17 times 4. But if he had played that amount over the last 4 years, this is a no-brainer. And I think with his play last year, he was a top 5 corner in the league last year, completely locked down. When you give him this deal, it reflects that. I think just with the progression of things, he was always going to be the 25-a-year guy. I'm interested to see what Derek Stingley gets now, what Sauce Gardner gets now. I think Trent McDuffie, I think, is extension eligible as well. I'm interested to see those, but I'm quite okay with this deal. My only hang-up now is with Ejiro Evero's defense. He kind of like put J.C. Horn in spots, right? He wouldn't let him travel with number ones necessarily. I think part of that was due to the deficiencies of the other spots around the defense. But when you pay J.C. Horn this amount now, he better travel with number one receivers. I need to see him on Jamar Chase the entire game. He gave up 11 yards versus Jamar Chase when he covered him in that Bengals game. The Panthers put out a list of like all of his yardage numbers he gave to number one receivers, and it was quite impressive. Like 3 yards to Drake London. Devontae Adams was like 1 catch for 5 yards, but we really dominated the Raiders that game. He deserves his paycheck. He just has to stay healthy, and I need to see him used as a true roaming lockdown corner because that's what he is.
And I agree. I think my big hang up is he has missed time due to injuries. And I would have liked to have seen from a team standpoint that guaranteed money maybe being a little bit lower.
I could have that come down. Yeah.
That was my biggest hesitation because you don't know. Tears his ACL this year, then it's a road to recovery. Maybe he's not the same player. And then all of a sudden you spent all this money on a player you really never saw on the field. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's happened quite a few times, especially for a kind of cyclical position in cornerback play. So just something to keep an eye on. I give the overall signing a B. This is a star Pro Bowl caliber type player. He deserved to get paid. He got his dues. Quality starters that I think the team acquired when free agency, the tampering period kind of opened on Monday, were Travion Moehrig from the Las Vegas Raiders and then Tershawn Wharton, both of whom the Carolina Panthers played this past year. Wharton played for the Chiefs. He is a massive dude. Both of them got extensions or signed deals that were 3 years in contract length. Wharton's was worth $45 million. Moehrig's was worth $51. Those are two needs. Obviously, with the Carolina Panthers, immediate fills. We missed on Milton Williams. How do you feel about these two signings? I love it from a value standpoint. I think we got two really good players at two really important positions on the defense.
Well, let's talk about it chronologically because you talked about missing on Milton Williams. That was the first reported signing that the Panthers made once the tampering window or whatever, however it's called, opened up at noon. Right around, I think it was like 12:45 or 1. It was from Diana Rossini. I know that's who it was from because I was on Blue Sky because Twitter was down. She had reposted or retweeted that the Panthers got Milton Williams. They were closing the deal. And then 10 minutes later, she took the post down and it said the Panthers are close, but other teams are involved. And eventually the New England Patriots steal him away with a deal worth $26 million a year for 4 years. So would have been more than what Derek Brown makes, who Derek Brown, we can agree, is a better player. It was a roller coaster of emotions, missing out on him, but then you get Trayvon Moehrig, who I think is a really good safety. He's a good physical safety that's going to show up in the run game. None of our safeties, I think, made a single tackle on a running back last year. Don't fact check me because I'm sure they did, but it seems like they didn't because they wouldn't come down and run defense. You saw Xavier Woods trying to make it on the NFL hardest hits compilation instead of tackling Jamar Chase. And that was the play. Jamar Chase had the 80-yard yak touchdown. I'm happy we have a safety that knows how to come down and hit people and pose their will and is rangy enough, I think, that he can play outside of the box when needed. I still think we need the free safety. And then Tershawn Wharton. Do you know who led the Chiefs in sacks last year? It was him. He had 8.5 sacks, playoffs and regular season combined. And he's a menace. I think he's really going to work well next to Derek Brown when he comes back healthy. And next to another defensive line signing that we made later in the day. I think overall, with these two signings, I'm giving them Bs, maybe an A in Wharton's case, but I think because these were spots we had to have, so I wasn't expecting, these weren't surprises to me, but I'm happy we rallied out of Milton Williams, and I think we got two impact players in both of these guys, and I expect both of them to start no matter however the rest of free agency and the draft go. I think both of these guys are good enough to start. And I think that when you can bring in multiple starters, I think average to plus starters from free agency, I think that's always a win. Look at what happened last year. We brought in, I think, exactly 2+ starters, you could argue. Both of them were guards, and the offensive line was soft, even with center issues throughout the year. The O-line performed great. I think this was a great start to free agency, getting both of these players.
Absolutely. And that's why I would actually lean that I think both of these signings should be given an A. They filled not only a position of need, we talked about it last Thursday, that sometimes paying in free agency for non premium positions guarantees you a guy that's kind of like top 10, top 5
Mhm.
potentially at his position. And I think and I'm not saying that's what Wharton is at his position, but Mo Rig, I think, is definitely kind of approaching that kind of status, especially a guy that can play inside the box. And at that point, it's just finding a guy that can play the middle third of the field and be long and rangy in that respect. I think when you start looking at some of the other signings, that's where I get a little bit more turned off. And the two that kind of turn me off, and I think it's four signings that were kind of in this rotational depth piece category, so to speak, is Mike Jackson, having him come back on a $14.5 million deal over 2 years, and then Tommy Tremble's deal. Obviously, it's only $10.5 million over 2 years. Familiarity with the team was drafted by it. But for me, these were players that were lackluster to begin with. I felt like we could have gotten better at those positions, and them kind of leaving in free agency would kind of let people know that, hey, there is a standard, a bar that this team demands, and they didn't meet it. However, I will say this: if the Panthers go after a cornerback 2 in free agency or the draft, and Mike Jackson's simply a backup rotational piece, I can see it. However, at over almost like $8 million, not 8 million, but like a little over $7 million a year, that's a lot of money to be shelled out, I think, for a backup cornerback at best. What are your thoughts on those two contracts in particular? Those, in my opinion, I'm giving a C or a D. I just thought that money could have been better spent elsewhere.
With the safeties in mind, Justin Reed just signed with the Saints. I don't know how the Saints are able to sign players with their cap sheet, but I guess we'll never know. Those two signings in particular, I think about it in a much different way than you are. When I see Trimble being brought back, when I see Mike Jackson being brought back, I think that these are depth signings. Like, and you have them listed here in the depth rotational piece, but to me, this is signaling, hey, we want to get a corner early in the draft. We want to get a tight end and a deeper tight end draft. I'm fine with Tremble making $5.25 million a year and Mike Jackson making $7.25 million. If we look at it from the perspective that both of those spots, let's call it tight end 2 and corner 2, if you get comparable players in the draft and add their salaries to what those two are making, I'm completely fine with it. Let's say we get a corner in the second round and he competes with corner 2. That makes the Mike Jackson signing, even better. Let's say we get a tight end like in the fourth round, or we trade one of our day 3 picks for a guy like Michael Mayer from the Las Vegas Raiders. That makes the Tommy Tremble signing even sweeter because now we know that he can be a depth piece, a blocking tight end. He can fit in 12 personnel. I'm fine with both of those signings. They don't inspire me, but I think they're signings that you needed to bring those guys back because I thought they flashed enough to where there's potential there, especially Tremble. He and Bryce seem to have a good rapport. I would still give both of them C's just because, like,
Yeah.
I'm not
It's
mad at
good.
them,
It's
and I don't. Yeah,
average,
it's
but it's
like,
not
you know
it's
what?
not a needle
It's like,
mover.
you know what? You're back. All right, welcome back. And then that's kind of how it is for me. And then the two new people that we brought in addition to those two moves, Patrick Jones, the second from Minnesota. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about his game. I looked up his stats when we signed him because, quite frankly, I hadn't heard too much about him. I guess I'm a casual in that regard. I promise I'm not wearing a Viking shirt, even though it's purple. It's a Hornets shirt. Shout out the Hornets win last night. But Patrick Jones, the second, it reminds me of a DJ Wonnum signing, not just because he's from the Vikings, but he flashed in a contract year. And if you're able to get more out of him than what he's been getting on his rookie deal, I think that's a win. He also, I've been looking at a lot of people's analysis from him from the Vikings. He's apparently like a really good run defender, like a nasty edge setter. I like to have that. If he can replace DJ Johnson on the depth chart, I'm perfectly fine with that. And then Bobby Brown, the nose tackle, not the singer. We have a Michael Jackson and a Bobby Brown on the team now. We just need to draft Princely Umanmielen, I guess. But Bobby Brown, the first true nose tackle we've had, it seems like in decades, but in the past few years, at least under Ejiro Avero's system, he has familiarity there, a real nose tackle. He's going to open up so much for Derek Brown, for Tershawn Wharton, and for guys like Ashawn Robinson and Shai Tuttle, who took a pay cut, who are now rotation players, which is huge to me. You no longer have to rely on Tuttle, Robinson, and I would assume they want to keep Jaden Crumity, the 6th-round pick, in rotation. You don't have to rely on those guys anymore. That's another platoon that you can bring in. So I'm ecstatic that we have a nose tackle. I think his compensation is super fair. In fact, I believe it's the exact deal that Tuttle got when we signed him. And Patrick Jones I think it's up to 20 over 2 years. I think there's incentives involved there. I'm cool with that as getting a rotational edge rusher. I'd like to have another edge rusher, but I'm cool with both of those signings. Give me a B overall on those signings.
Yeah, the Patrick Jones, Bobby Brown signings, again, positions of need.
And
these are good players at those positions.
We have breaking news, Panthers regarded. Johnny Hecker hit the market, so we were in need of a punter, and the Panthers have signed the former Bills punter Sam Martin to a 1-year deal up to $3 million. So don't need a punter anymore. I'm not going to act like I know a ton about the Bills punting game. He probably didn't punt a ton this past season or any of the Josh Allen seasons. So hopefully his leg is fresh.
Yeah, I think he's a half decent punter. It's been a while since I've seen some of the statistics for them. I know he was a decent punter. I think back for the Detroit Lions not too long ago. Again, some of these special teams players who aren't like at the top of their craft a lot of times move
kind of plug and
frequently.
place. Yeah, if he can really do his job, I'm not mad at it. But how do you react to the other two signings where they're going to be substantial pieces on the defensive side of the ball?
I think Patrick Jones is extremely underrated. Obviously, he's been in a limited role, but where everybody was talking about how Bryce Huff was really productive and he got this super big deal, the Havoc rate, which looks at tackles for losses, sacks, passes defended, just simple metrics where it's, okay, were you able to stop the offense on a given play and forcing negative play at that? And he was really good. The only true edge rusher he was behind was Dante Fowler, and he had a monster year for the Commanders. So when you see that, obviously, some of that's probably because Brian Flores is sending these exotic pressures. There are stunts and different things that are freeing you up. But like you said, he's a known run fitter. You add that with Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Johnson, you can see the emphasis of we are going to fit the run. And now it's just finding a couple pass rushers that we can kind of rotate into that to go alongside a guy like DJ Wanham. And all of a sudden, this defensive line looks like more of a strength than a weakness that it was a year ago.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm viewing it, right? Last year in free agency, the emphasis was very clearly the offensive line. And that went from one of the worst ever. It's still top 10 in most sacks allowed. I don't know if it's still number one in pressures allowed, but it's certainly up there to a strength. I think we have, if you look at it, top 15 at worst in terms of pass blocking at least. And so we didn't even mention that they got both of the centers back in Austin Corbett and Kay Mays. They'll both be back next year. That was a true strength for the Panthers, not only just the offense, but the team as a whole. I think you can look at the D line like that now, especially with the assumption that in a deep interior defensive lineman class and a deep edge rusher class, I think you probably add at least one to each of those positions. I think we have flipped the defensive line, which was among the worst in the league, gave up the most rushing yards, gave up the third most rushing yards of all time, and that starts in the trenches. I think you can flip that and say, this is going to be a strength of the team. They are going to stop the run on, if not stop, limit the run on first and second down, and force teams into passing situations where you can get your number one star corner involved now.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And there will be more to talk about, I think, where the other positions that need to be filled, whether it's free agency or the draft, are going to become more apparent over the next couple of days. And this first wave of free agency starts to die down. But with that being said, we're coming to a close on this episode. And I think it's time to get into Purrfect Takes. My perfect take this week, and I'll rehash last week's because I got it wrong. I thought they were going to cut Miles Sanders and Shai Tuttle. They cut Miles Sanders and they renegotiated Shy Tuttle's contract. Saves a little bit of money for the team. He comes back, and that actually makes me question whether or not if Mason Graham's there at 8, if they take a guy like him. Obviously, Tuttle's on the last year of his deal. I think A'Shawn Robinson is also at the end of his 2-year deal that he signed last offseason. So when you start looking at that, interior defensive line is still a need moving forward. You just wonder, okay, with the emphasis on the interior, do they take a guy like that, or are they heading a different direction, whether it be offense or another defensive position of need? My perfect take, now that we've rehashed last week's take, is I think Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter will be the top 3 picks in the draft. We have not touched on the position groups that Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are part of, but when we talk about these top 3 teams' needs, when you pick in the top 3, your team is devoid of a lot of talent. And I think outside of Cam Ward and him being the distinct number 1 quarterback in this class, you have then the most talented prospects after that. And I think that comes down to Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. You see the value that they add to their teams over their collegiate career, and that translates to the NFL. That's my take. Those are the 3 guys that are taken with the top 3 picks, no matter who picks, at what picks. I'm not saying who goes where, but that is the take that I have after this episode.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about those 3 being the top 3 guys. In terms of talent, it's certainly Hunter, Carter. Then you could talk about Mason Graham, who you just mentioned in there, Ashton Jeanty in there, but I don't think we're going to see another running back go top 3 for a long time, maybe ever. Because like the Saquon going 2 was huge, right? But if Bijan Robinson makes it to 8, Jahmyr Gibbs makes it to 12, don't think we're going to see Jeanty break into that top 3 unless it's like, oh, the Chiefs picked 3rd because Mahomes hurt his knee and now he's back. Then something like that kind of scenario. I like it. My take is also going to be regarding day 1 of the draft. We talked about QBs today. Think we are going to see at least 2 QBs taken on day 1. Could be more than that, but I know for a fact Cam Ward's going. It wouldn't surprise me if Sanders and Dart go, but that's kind of how I see it. As far as moving forward, because we're in the draft season now, free agency has started. Every episode we do is going to be a position breakdown up until the week of the draft. So we did QBs today. Later this week, we will do running backs, and then so on and so forth, all the way down to, I believe it is April 22nd, is the Tuesday before the draft. That's when we're going to do our mock draft, our big board, all that kind of stuff. But until then, on Thursday, stay tuned for running backs, one of, if not the deepest group in this draft. And we will catch you then. Keep pounding.